All right, I've just got two quick hands today. This is from last night, playing 25.50 cent. And it's the same game as last Wednesday night, where the buy-in was only $25. So starting 50 bigs effective. By this point, I think I do have maybe 50 in my stack, but stack size is not really relevant to this hand. I got Queen Jack under the gun. Now, Queen Jack offsuit, it's definitely the bottom of our range, but that said, it still isn't open. This is seven-handed, but, I guess we're under the gun +1, so the low jack in any case. Hijack actually jams for only 25 cents more. And then the big blind calls. So, we can't re-raise. I mean, even if we could, the only option really ever is to call here. Flop top pair, and big blind leads out for 350. So this is a donk lead, and it's also a pretty big sizing, but we can't fold here, obviously. We could maybe go for a raise, but I think it's a little too thin because all we're really targeting is draws, and even draws are going to have a decent equity against just one pair. A few notes about Big Blind here. He seems like he's very new to poker, and he even admitted that he called with aces to a single raise pre-flop, and then got hardly any value out of it. And he also had been making these pretty big bets with nothing, but he'd also been doing it with strong hands at the same time. So, not a ton to read out of this, but I think call's really our only choice here. So I call. Turns an 8. So we pick up a gut shot with our queen, and we get checked to. I decided to go 4. I think you should maybe go a bit bigger here. But, I think it's maybe fine. And Big Blind tries to raise me by 25 cents. And I let him know you have to do at least $8. And he's like, okay, fine. $8.25. And I mean, we're never going to fold to a min raise, especially from a guy who's trying to raise us by 25 cents. When we at least have something on the board. So we end up calling. And river's a 2. And then Big Blind leads. He starts grabbing $5, and I'm like, okay, I'll call $5. Then he goes for 8, then 10. Then he just grabs a whole $15 and puts it in the pot. And it's only half pot, but it is a very strong bet regardless, just the donk lead after a check raise. Now this 2 seems kind of like a brick, but it does pair the board. And that means we're losing to some things that Big Blind could be flatting with, like aces and kings and queens, which we know he would do. And, we could have just been turned by pocket 8s, jack 8, jack 9. All these things could have possibly gotten there on the turn. And also queen 10 or hands like that. Another thing we got going for us, and this should never really be a consideration when you're making a decision, but we do get to see Big Blind's hand since hijack right here is all in. So I decide, we probably don't have strong enough of a hand to call here when this is not going to be a bluff very often. So we fold. Big Blind shows King Deuce, so we made the right fold. Just a very bizarre line from Big Blind to lead out the flop, check raise a turn, and then just bomb the river. So I'm glad we got away from it. I didn't expect Big Blind to have a 2 very often, but I didn't eliminate the possibility. But I thought the range that did beat me was going to be a lot more 2-pair and boat heavy than trips. So I didn't really expect trips, but either way, I'm happy with the decision. One thing I will say is I was kind of on the fence initially, more so leaning towards a fold, and then I really decided to fold because I could just tell Big Blind was just looking way too comfortable and way too relaxed, So kind of a bit of a tell there that, if he was bluffing, he probably would have been a lot more nervous, and he did not seem nervous at all. This next hand is 5-handed, and I open to $1.50. Now, 5-6, I like this hand, but I feel like it gets me in a lot of trouble. And then another thing about it is that it's just a fold. I thought it actually was an open, but it's only an open on the button. On the cutoff, the only suited connectors that you're opening are going to be 9-8 and better. So yeah, we should have just been folding pre here, but 5-6 still is somewhat playable, especially if we're in position, and we are because button does fold here. And then both blinds call, and we go to a flop with king 5 queen. Checks to us. If this was heads up, you could maybe throw out a c-bet, but we do have a pair, so it's not like we have complete air. But three ways, not really a reason to bet here because we're just going to get called down by better. And so we check, and we turn 2 pair. Now, the board is very draw heavy. We have plenty of straight draws, plenty of flush draws that our opponents could both have. So when it checks to us, we got to go for some value here. I only go 250. I don't like it in hindsight. I think you need to go bigger here when this board's that draw heavy. And big blind here is actually the same player from last hand who we were against, who was also on the big blind in that hand. And what happens is small blind and big blind call, and then river's a 3. So pretty much a total brick. I mean, 2-4 gets there, but I don't really expect either of them to have 2-4. But then big blind leads out for $10. And this is just really weird because big blind hasn't really shown any strength up until this point. And nothing really gets there, as I said. So either it's a slow played hand or it's a bluff is what I'm imagining. So I don't think for too long, and I just decide to call. And big blind shows king 3 offsuit. So, we got there on the river. Once again, big blind did it to us. And I don't know, whenever a player donk leads on the river, especially someone who's newer to the game, it should be raising alarm bells. Especially when we had just seen in the previous hand I went over, where big blind just donk led in a very similar fashion with something that got there on the river. So for that reason, you can maybe find a fold here, but at the same time, I mean, we've got 2 pair. We've got to be at least calling down with some hands. We can't get bullied out of every pot, and I'd seen big blind, make some pretty weird bluffs, but never on the river, so I'm not really sure what the correct decision was, because I don't know if big blind's really doing this with worse for value. Like, you shouldn't really have ace king or ace queen or any like king x hand that's just 1 pair. Those are the only hands I'm going to go over, but I did actually end up profiting. One of them was just an all-in on the flop when we were short stack and I had top pair, and the other guy just had a gut shot. And then the other one, I had a flush draw that ended up hitting on the river and won a pretty big pot there, so. But yeah, maybe the biggest lesson from today is whenever a newer player donk leads on the river, it's going to be pretty strong of a range, so. For that reason, you can make some big folds, kind of like that first hand we went over, and you can make some even bigger folds like in this hand.